Good evening, good evening, good evening. Thank you so much for joining Empowerment Liberation Cathedral for Word Wednesday on tonight. I want to give people a few moments to tune in with us on tonight for our Word Wednesday. We have a special Word Wednesday coming to you on today, and so I want to give people a few moments to join us. Once again, Bishop Allyson Abrams here at Empowerment Liberation Cathedral for Word Wednesday. So I'm going to give everyone a few moments to join in. If you have an opportunity, please do share this live so that others can have the opportunity to watch along with you. Once again, welcome to Empowerment Liberation Cathedral's Word Wednesday. Tonight we have a special topic for you. So I want to give people an opportunity to sign on. We want you to get in here, get in here, get in here. All right, so we are giving people a few moments to sign on to Word Wednesday. Again, we know that this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we want to talk to you about domestic violence and violence in general on tonight. So that's why we're giving you a few moments to sign on, giving you a few moments to tune in, and we want you to share to make sure that people who are connected to you can also watch this live stream. It's going to be a very good live on tonight. And so I need as many people as possible sharing this live stream. All right. So once again, welcome, welcome, welcome to Empowerment Liberation Cathedral's Word Wednesday. We are talking about domestic violence on tonight. And so I need everybody to join in if possible and, share it with your friends and family. Good evening, Tisa. We have Tisa Dotson who has joined us on tonight. And so we want to bring our special guest. We have a special guest this evening. That's why I'm telling y'all got to share this live stream. Those who are on YouTube, share the link. Those who are on Facebook, post it on your pages so that others will be able to watch this live stream with us on tonight. We have a very special guest on tonight. She is none other than Chadra Pittman. She is an anthropologist, a lecturer. She is one who works with intimate partner, domestic violence, and LGBTQIA issues, and she's an advocate for all of those. She is a writer. She also is the executive director for the Sankofa projects. She has a wealth of experience. She is a graduate of the George Mason University with a degree in anthropology. I always like to tell that she's a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. That's my sorority for those who did not know it. Good evening, Toya. Thanks for joining. And so I want to bring none other than Chadra Pittman. Chadra, I'm looking for your other degree here. I don't see it. I'm sure you can tell me what it is. But I want to bring Chadra onto the screen at this time, and we're going to have a great conversation. Welcome, 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 Chadra. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Of course, of course, of course. Thank you, Bishop,
All right.
for allowing me to be here in this space with you. It's good to see you, and I'm very excited that you are and the church is doing this program on domestic violence. It's incredibly important to bring awareness in all the spaces that we occupy, talking about a subject that most people don't want to talk about. So I commend you
Thank you.
and the leadership at your church for agreeing to do such a program.
Thank you so much. And you have a greeting from our deacon chair who says blessings to you on tonight, Deacon Sylvester. So we want to first look at domestic violence and what it is. Now, as I looked at domestic violence, first of all, we want people to know domestic can happen to anyone of any age.
Right.
Can occur between those who are heterosexual, those who are in same-sex relationships. It can occur with anybody. It can include
Right.
violence against children, violence against parents, elderly. It can take all kinds of forms as physical, emotional, verbal abuse.
Right.
And so we just want to name those for people on tonight because I think it's important that people realize that sometimes people are in domestic abusive relationships, and it may not look like what you thought it would look like. And so, talk about that with us a little bit, Shadra. Relationships that become violent.
Yeah, I think that, and you introduced that really powerfully. I think that a lot of times when people think domestic violence, they think of bruises, they think of people being battered, and that is a part of domestic violence. The other side of domestic violence is intimidation. The other part of domestic violence is stalking. Some of the non-physical ways that people abuse each other, particularly in the LGBT community, it's outing a partner. That's a form of domestic violence, or what we know now as intimate partner violence. And I focus specifically on the deaf and the LGBTQIA plus community because those two communities are often left out of the conversation with domestic violence. Domestic violence, still to this day, it's changing, but a lot of the conversation around domestic violence has to do with heteronormative relationships. So it's male, female, traditional, biological male, biological female. There's not a lot of conversation. There has not been a lot of conversation around lesbian violence, around gay men violence, around trans violence. And we know with the trans community, in particular, trans women, especially trans women of color, are at risk.
Yes.
They are the number one mortalities that we are finding are with trans women. So violence, domestic violence or intimate partner violence could be as extreme as a bruise. It could be as extreme as someone saying that they don't want you to be in contact with your mother, or
Mm,
they don't want you to talk to your friends anymore,
yes.
or they start showing up at your job,
Yes.
or they check your cell phone. All of those things are leading towards an unfortunate end, because when someone is exhibiting that kind of control, domestic violence, just like rape, it's about control.
Yeah.
And so learning those signs early, and we all feel it, right? When we're around someone or we've been in a relationship with someone and we feel uncomfortable. The gut tells you something's not right with this. No
Absolutely.
one needs to be checking your phone. No one needs to tell you that you can't call your sister or your mother. No one needs to stand in the way of you taking a trip with a friend. It's all elements of control.
You said something that was very interesting, and I had not thought about this. But
Hmm.
that outing is a way of domestic.
Huge.
Wow, talk about that a little bit because I don't think people connect the dots on that particular uh, act of violence.
Sure, sure. Well, you know, how you choose to be in the world is your business. Whether or not you choose to be out and talk about your relationships, your personal relationships, is up to you. One of the tactics that has been used in particular in LGBTQIA intimate partner violence has been outing, shaming the other person, threatening the person that if they don't do or they don't stay in the relationship that they are in, that the other person will tell their friends or family, or they will out them on social media. And those kinds of tactics have driven people to the extreme. I mean, if someone is struggling or growing up in a community where they will be ostracized from their family of origin, that is the scariest thing for some people to have to face, to deal with not having their parents in their lives.
Right.
And so that's a form of violence. Anytime you are intimidating another person,
Yeah.
Anytime you are evoking fear in another person, I don't care if it's over outing them, over, like I said, standing in the way of them having relationships outside of the relationship that they have with that particular person.
Yeah.
All of that is an element of control, and we need to be really mindful of it when we see it in our relationships and when we see it in our friends' relationships. We've all been around people where we kind of do the side eye at the way someone is talking to their loved one
Right.
or the way someone is treating their loved one. And it's really up to the bystander. It's up to us to
Mm.
maybe not say something in that moment if you don't feel comfortable, if you feel like your safety will be compromised.
Yes.
But you pull that friend to the side and have a conversation and you ask your friends, are they okay?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's two women. They're not going to be violent towards each other. Women can be very violent
Yeah.
towards each other. And it's not only, if we're talking about a stud femme relationship, it's not always the more aggressive or masculine centered woman.
You're right.
Sometimes it's the more feminine woman who is the violent one. So violence it doesn't have a race, it doesn't have a gender, it doesn't have a sexuality, it doesn't have a socioeconomic background.
Yeah.
Anyone and everybody can be violent, and anyone and everybody can be a victim or a survivor of domestic violence.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I see our first lady is on, as well as Deacon Sylvester is saying, "Ask your friend if they're okay." And I do think that's important because you talked about the
Yeah,
and how sometimes we don't trust our intuition. We're like,
we
"Oh,
don't.
for years, they always
Right,
they've been together. They got the best relationship, and she's always smiling, and he's always laughing, and they have a good time. They travel and do everything, but
right,
something still in us says something's going on, and we don't.
right.
And so
We
I,
don't trust them.
like you said, we need to begin to trust that, and not just assume because somebody is same gender loving that they're not being abusive, and not just assume because somebody's got on some Tims and maybe got on a hat with a short haircut
Right,
that they're the violent one. You know,
right. I was, yeah, go ahead, beloved.
hey, I know some people who wear high heel shoes and lipstick that can be very violent. Okay, so come up
Absolutely.
with the truth, cousin. And so
Yeah, no,
I just think we got to be honest with the people.
no, no, it's absolutely true. And I think that part of what needs to happen too is that, I always tell people, don't let the lip gloss fool you. That doesn't mean, and then you can take that any way you want. But the reality is that we, as people who love our people, need to be paying attention, and we need to be mindful of the signs. We need to be mindful of when we're out with a friend and our friend is saying, oh God, I have to call this person back. And if I don't, and they have this kind of nervousness around that.
Right,
That is a problem. You should never be in a relationship and feel intimidated. You should never feel unsupported. You should never feel frightened to speak your truth. You
right,
should never be fearful to end a relationship. A lot of times people are in domestic violence relationships and people say, well, why do people stay? A lot of times people stay because they fear for their lives. I mean, that's the reality. And so we need to, as bystanders, as loved ones, as church members, as friends, as sorority members, we need to be cognizant of the fact that it could be any of us. And the reality is that, the slogan for this year is everyone knows someone. And
yeah,
it's true. We all know someone who has experienced some form of violence in their lifetime or sadly will experience violence in their lifetime. So we on the as I said, the bystanders, the friends, need to be advocates for the ones who can't speak
yeah,
or are afraid to speak.
yes, yes. And I wanted us to look at just for a second um,
Sure.
when we talk about domestic violence, it is a crime. Uh,
Hmm.
so we want to make sure that people know this is a crime. And so people
Absolutely.
need to be dealt with because of the crime that they're committing. Now, yes, we do
Right.
give people the opportunity to seek treatment, counseling,
Hmm.
but it is a crime. And sometimes people die
Absolutely.
because of the crime that is being committed.
Absolutely.
So,
Right.
we don't want to look at or overlook the fact that this is a crime. Um, when we look at statistics, Shadra, here it says on average, over or
Hmm.
people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. During one
Yeah.
year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 10 million
Yes.
women and men in just one
Hmm.
year alone
Right.
experience domestic violence.
Right.
I think those numbers are staggering. That it should not be anywhere near that. Shouldn't be any.
It shouldn't be anywhere near that at all. And I think part of it is, you know, we can't look just at domestic violence in a vacuum. We have to look at the overall culture that we live in. We live in a violent culture. We live in a culture that where we have shootings in schools with children, and we have legislation that's not being passed. They're not moving quickly enough to ban AR-15 rifles, right? That's perpetuating violence.
Yes.
You have conversations, you have things in the media, you have advertisements. If you look at some of the advertisements, you have images of domestic violence. It's glamorized, this notion of being violent towards other people. We hear it in the music. All music, and not just rap music, because people like to give rap music a bad rap, pun intended, right? It's
Yeah.
not only rap music; it's across the board. There, violence is a part of this culture. So, and this country began in violence. I
Yeah.
mean, if we're going to go back, I
Right.
mean, the foundations of this country are rooted in violence. You have, you know, the settlers or the colonists or the intruders coming into a calm environment of native people, of indigenous people,
Yes.
giving them infected blankets,
Yeah.
raping women, taking territory, taking land. It began in violence.
Right.
So what we are experiencing now is the fruit of what was laid back then. And so in order to for me to for us to heal as an entire country, we got to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the way this country was founded. That mentality of violence, that
Yeah.
mentality of I'm going to take what's not mine,
Yeah.
I'm going to come in and take it.
Right.
What is that if it's not domestic violence and rape where you're exerting your power over somebody? So we have some, you know, systemic issues that are rooted in disrespect,
Yeah.
disregard
Yeah.
for others,
Ex-
whether the other be a woman, whether the other be LGBTQIA, whether the other be someone who's deaf, whether the other be somebody who's in a wheelchair.
yeah. Yeah.
We perpetuate violence against each other, and we really need to look at, like I said, the root of the issue. It didn't start
Today.
just, you know, it has a genesis.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're going to take it to the good book, it has a genesis, and that genesis is how the foundation of this country. There are places in the world where rape and domestic violence and these kinds of things are seen as like abominations. I was talking to an anthropologist at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and he was talking to me about a community where he was teaching a class and he was teaching the students about the date rape drug.
Oh.
And they could not conceptualize that someone would put something in someone else's drink in order to take advantage of them. Like they could not conceptually understand how one human could do that to another. They just couldn't get it because in their country, I think it was Finland, in their country, that was unheard of. Relationships are amicable. Relationships are respectful.
Wow.
You would never think of doing something to another person. You would never think of taking the body of another person without their permission, without their consent. So, like I said, a lot of the issues that we have here are deeply rooted. And until we get to the root of the problem,
Yes. Yes.
these kinds of issues are going to perpetuate, and we're going to have year after year of sadly having to come together to talk about statistics and how many people have been affected by domestic violence.
When I think about the games that the children play, they are
Oh,
violent. And so
incredibly violent.
some years ago we talked about needing to take the violence out of the cartoons because you have your babies that are watching this violence even in cartoons. And so
Right.
violence is at the core. And I think I remember talking about once before how violent our sports are. You know, you look at football,
Mhm.
it is a violent
Right.
game. You know, there are
Right.
people who are hurt and people who were hurt, injured, for
Hmm.
their life that could not be, they couldn't have any treatment because it was an injury that, did not allow them to go back and play the game. Some people did not walk again. Some people were just vegetables. And so it's a very violent, some of the sports are very violent that
Yeah.
people support. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not going to say I don't watch football because I do, but it is a very violent sport, just like some.
Right.
And so, yes, I think there are so many violent things around till people are kind of numb to the level of
Hmm.
violence that we have in our country today.
Right. And I think it's through, honestly, cousin Bishop, it's through talking about these sorts of things. So, I went to West Virginia University, big football school. You know, um, football is not necessarily the problem, but what the problem is when we're not talking about, well, what happens. So when someone's aggressive on the field and they come home and they're aggressive at home, like what about transitioning that person from this high energy, high, in some cases testosterone feeling of machismo and domination, and then they come home to their families. Have they do they have within the NFL some kind of therapy, some kind of mental health training that allows that person to transition from that kind of aggression to a more gentle environment? It's the same thing with families who are in the military, people who have been at war. When
Yeah,
they come home, is there a transition from them being out on the battle lines and then coming home and then potentially abusing their loved ones because they don't know how to transition from the
yeah,
battlefield to the living room, right? So we need to think about mental health. We need to think about the ways in which we collectively are managing ourselves in these spaces. And
absolutely.
I think it's through conversation, being able and being open and willing to have conversation about these things that matter. Because domestic violence, when you think about it, yes, it affects the person that is being affected, who is on the recipient end of the domestic violence, but it also affects work productivity for the country. It affects physical, economical, the quality of life that the person can have, the ability to move throughout the world freely. All of those things are affected. And if that person has children, then guess what? Those children are affected by domestic violence. And if that person has a mother who's worried about her, guess what? Mom is affected by the domestic violence, or dad and the siblings. So everybody, the whole community
Yes.
is affected when someone is going through DV.
And
So when we help one person, we help the whole community.
absolutely. And let me ask this, because I do
Mhm.
to some of the statistics specifically, but when you talk about domestic violence in a family and the kids are present to watch the domestic violence, oftentimes,
Right.
I'm not going to say all the time, but oftentimes the children who have watched that take on that behavior and it continues to the next generation. But talk about the if you can, Shadra, for a moment, that the young
Yeah.
people grow up in the household feel and deal with because they see their dad beating their mom, or see their mom beating their dad, or see their mom beating
Yeah.
other mom, or dad beating their other dad. Talk about that for a second.
Right. Well, I'll just say this. I mean, I think, I'm the mother of two sons. And I made a decision when I had my children. Well, let me go back a little further. So I'm the daughter of Southern parents,
Yeah.
okay, from Alabama,
Yeah.
Alabama, North Carolina.
My
I was
cousin.
raised, okay, exactly. I was raised that if I got out of line, it wasn't anything for my mother to say, go in the backyard and get a switch,
Absolutely.
right? Or go in the belt drawer and get a belt.
Right.
And I lived with such fear and trepidation about misbehaving or about doing anything because I was scared that I was going to be beaten. And I say that and I start there because I think that when I became a mom, I made a decision not to hit my children. I have boys. If I had girls, I'd make the same decision. And the reason why I made that decision is because I wanted to draw a very distinct line between love and abuse, that they don't mix. And I know a lot of people say, oh, spare the rod, spoil the child. Like, there's all these sayings that people say. And to each his own. I don't stand in judgment of anybody who chooses to spank. I have friends, siblings who spank their children. I made a conscious decision because I believe, based on what I know from the work that I've done over the years, that there is a correlation between hitting a child and that child growing up and being confused about the messaging. Well, my mom loves me, and she says this hurts me more than it hurts her. Love should never hurt. So I think if we collectively could get to a point where we say, we're not going to do that anymore. I made a decision with my sons. I said, you know what? I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you about why I'm disappointed. I'm going to talk to you about what you could have done differently. I'm going to treat you with a level of respect. And I'm not going to say that I love you and put my hands on you because I'm setting you up for failure when you get older. Because you will think that that's okay because your mom did it. I don't want that on me. I
Yeah.
want them to know that if someone puts their hands on them, that it's wrong. And I think culturally, we have got to start to think differently about that. And I know that many of us were raised with parents, we got spanked and we say, oh, it didn't do anything to us. Yeah, it did. It did. I mean, there are studies that prove the levels in the brain are affected when we've been beaten. And at the end of the day, it doesn't make better kids. I know kids who get spanked who are just as naughty as the ones who don't get spanked. So I think, in a situation where you have children growing up watching violence, it can do one of two things, sis. It can either create a child who is going to perpetuate that violence. They're going to be violent. They're going to be bullies. They're going to be the ones in school that are causing trouble. Or it's going to do the exact opposite. It's going to have that child say, I never want to be like that person. I'm going to be different. I'm never going to abuse, So I think it's six in one hand, half a dozen in the other. But I think if we can begin to think about the way in which we treat children, I even think as far as body autonomy, I never raised my kids to have to hug people they didn't want to hug.
Okay.
Children, no, and really, and I got a lot of slack coming from Alabama and North Carolina. People say, go hug Aunt Janie.
Right.
Well, my son doesn't want to. So why should I, as his mother, force him to give his body to someone that he doesn't want to? So
Okay.
what I would do is say, you know what? You will always be respectful of your elders. You will always treat them with kindness. You will always lend way to them, right? For being the adult in the room. You will never speak out of tone with them. If you don't want to touch them, because touching is a choice,
Yeah.
then you can say hi, you can wave. There are plenty of ways. You can grab your chest and say, nice to meet you. And right now during COVID, we're not hugging anyway.
Right.
So maybe this is a good time for people to start to practice
Right.
moving away from this need to touch other people, even grown folk. A lot of times I'm a very huggy, touchy person. I've pulled back from that a little bit because I don't know what someone else's experience has been in this life. They may be really uncomfortable with being touched. So before I hug someone, I say, are you a hugger? Can we hug?
Yes.
Yes or no? I ask for consent. I think consent is important.
Yes.
Across the board.
Yeah.
Across the board. And I know a lot of people who are Southern say, I don't know what she's talking about. She needs to beat them kids and get them right. I'm just saying it's something for us to think about
Yeah.
as we move forward. Because if we're going to deal in science and fact based information,
Yeah.
it doesn't make the child any more obedient to
Yeah.
beat them. I don't want my kids to fear me. I want them to respect me
Yeah. Yeah.
and know that their moral compass is on the right side, adjusted, that they're going to do what they're supposed to do, not because they're fearful
Yes.
that they're going to get a spanking, but they know it's the right thing to do. That's more important to me
Okay. Okay.
because they're going to get bigger than me at one point.
Well, that's true. That's true. And let me say, I do think that sometimes children who grow up in houses where there is domestic violence, um, they have I guess, first two things going on. One is
Hmm.
they resent being in that space because
Of
of
course.
it interrupts their peace, and it causes them to look at the abuser differently. Why are you
Yeah.
beating the other person that I love? And so I think they're connected
Right.
because sometimes they do love the abuser as well. So how do
Of
you
course. Of
love the
course.
abuser when they're abusing you love? So it causes a lot of internal conflict, I think,
Hmm.
in those young people who have had to grow up in those households. But then also, this is, as my wife, the therapist, the practitioner, the psychologist likes to say,
Yes.
it's behavior that they've seen. So if
Yes.
they continue to see this and they feel like this is normal because it has become their norm, then they feel like the
Right.
person that they are in a relationship with, they can treat them the same way. And so,
Of course.
that is begetting that same behavior. And so,
Well, and you,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say what you say is, I mean, it's that's exactly right. And I think it comes back to the fact that they need to understand that this is a crime. I
Absolutely.
mean, not only do you not have a right to put your hands on another person, but it's a crime.
Yes.
It is against the law to stalk, to abuse, to take from someone, to threaten someone, to hit someone. You
Yes.
can't do that.
Yeah.
And so they need to know that, you commit the crime, you could potentially, it could affect your life for the long haul if
Yeah.
you do something that hopefully not hurt someone to a point where it's a homicide. But we have to think about that. Who do
Absolutely.
you want to be in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, as you're talking, I was thinking, I think this starts at that little kindergarten level,
Of
where
course.
kids hit the other kids. And they say,
Oh,
oh,
exactly.
her because he likes her. Well, no, he shouldn't be putting
Right.
hands on her. But I think, it
Right.
does go back to there when people don't deal with the kids hitting the other kids. I
Yeah.
remember this. Let me share this with you. Um,
Sure.
Everybody who's watching, my oldest daughter, when she was in middle school, I think she was in the seventh or eighth grade. I don't remember which one, but there was a young man who hit her, and so
Mm.
she was upset because I drug her down to the police station when I found out about it. And I said, no, he has committed a crime and we're going to report this. I had a friend who was a police officer. And so
Okay.
I said, we're going to report this. We went down to the police station. She did not want to report it because she said, oh, well, it's not really that serious, Ma. You're making a big deal out of it. No, it is that serious. We're going to, I came out of a domestically abusive relationship. Any type of hitting, I'm not going to stand for. And so somebody,
Right.
we're not going to let that continue to the next generation. We're going to break this and
Right.
stop this right here. And so we're going to the police station. So we did turn in his name.
Mhm.
His mother was very angry that she had to come down to the police station because at that point he had to be dealt with by the police. And so she
Okay.
deal with her son about shoving and putting his hands on someone else. And so,
Right.
there were two things involved here. The person who was the victim had to,
Right.
you don't have to be a victim. You can always go and report the crime that someone has committed against you. But also, the abuser had to realize everybody's not just going to allow you to shove them and push them. Some people are
Absolutely.
to the police or bring charges against you. And so that is
Right.
that day, when she was in middle school. And
Or
so,
I could,
you just have to teach the children right, and hopefully they will follow in that path.
no, I commend you for doing that. I don't think we take domestic violence. I don't think we take the hitting and pushing and shoving serious enough. And I think children need to know that there are repercussions for your behavior.
Absolutely.
So, kudos to you for doing that. I think I bet you he learned a lesson about putting his hands
I'm,
on other people. And your daughter learned a grave lesson about the fact that her mother was not going to tolerate abuse.
she did. She did. And let me say, she wasn't happy about it, but, we moved
Of
on.
course not. Yeah.
Moved on. Okay,
Right.
so now when we look at domestic violence statistics by state, I want to give some information here.
Sure.
Oklahoma, when you look at domestic violence, 49.1% of Oklahoma women and
Yeah.
47% of Oklahoma men experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Number two, you have Kentucky with
Hmm.
0.3% of women, 33.5% of men. Then you have at number three, Missouri, 41.8% of women, and 35.2% of men experience domestic violence or intimate partner violence or sexual violence or stalking. You have number four, Nevada. Okay, all the folks that like to go out to Las Vegas. Uh,
Hmm.
43.8% of Nevadan women and 32.8% of men experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Number five, Arizona. Okay, so
Hmm.
when you look at these states, the 10 states with the highest rates of domestic violence overall, Oklahoma at 49%, Kentucky at 45%, Iowa at 45%, North Carolina, all y'all folks who moving to North Carolina, 43.9%, Nevada
Hmm.
0.8%. Alaska, who would have thought Alaska over there? 43.3%. The state of Washington,
Hmm.
number seven, 42.6%. Arizona, 42.6%. Idaho, who would have thought? Don't they do the potatoes over there? That they would have 42% of
Yeah.
domestic violence over there. And Missouri, number 10, 41.7. So all of those states are between
Yeah.
40 and 50% domestic violence in their states. Okay.
Yeah.
Not to say the
Yeah.
states that some other people are living in don't have it. We're not saying that. But
Of
these are
course.
the top 10. Top
Right.
10. That is entirely too
Yeah.
much. And I'm glad you brought
Yeah.
up stalking. But go ahead. Go ahead, Shay.
Mhm. No, I'm just going to say, I mean, it's hearing those statistics, it's daunting, but um, it's a national crisis, domestic violence, and outside of the United States, it is a global issue. Violence against women, femicide, the killing of women, is an issue.
Yes.
Um, Everything from catcalling on the street. Women have been killed who have been catcalled, who have said, please don't talk to me that way.
Hmm.
Uh, and they've been killed for it, for simply saying no, for simply saying they don't want to give their phone number to
Yeah.
someone. Women in different countries have been acid has been thrown on them. They've been burned
Yes.
alive.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about like um, minor offenses. We're talking about life altering situations that no human being should ever have to experience. So thank you for pointing out those statistics. I mean, it's horrible to
Yeah.
know that nearly 50% of the people in those places, and those are the ones that they know of.
That they
The
know of.
reality is that you and I both know that so many domestic violence cases
Or-
go unreported
Right.
because people are fearful for their lives. And many of those cases are relationships based. When people think domestic violence or they think these crimes, a lot of times they think it's someone that is unfamiliar to the person who has been victimized. No, no, no. It's usually a husband, wife, longtime partner who is beating them because they know their movements,
Yes.
and they know how to terrorize them.
And I want to talk a little bit about rape because we have so many people who have been raped today,
Right.
are still being raped. And so
Hmm.
a lot of times in the African American community, we're not talking about rape. Um, rape is something that damages the individual for the rest of their life. However, in some cases, people want you to look the other way, or people
Hmm.
ask you to act as if it did not happen and you got to move on. They try to give you a timeline. Well, girl, that happened a year ago. You haven't moved.
Right.
Well, that happened 5 years ago. You still thinking about that, talking about that. And so, I think sometimes we're insensitive about some of these things that happen to people that are very detrimental to their soul.
Right. Right. I mean, I think it's interesting that people will extend more compassion and more grace to someone when their house has been robbed over when their body has been violated. You
Yes.
know, somebody's house is robbed. Oh my God, that's so terrible. Well, what happened? And they want to know the whole story. They want to talk you through it. They want to bring you belongings. Do you need something? Somebody has been sexually assaulted, and all of a sudden, everyone's quiet. Um, no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to touch it. No one wants to have the important and necessary conversations around healing. And for the African American community, June Jordan has a poem about my rights, and she talks about that she is a history of rape. She is a history of these assaults against her body. As Black women, as BIPOC women, as Indigenous women, I always say me too. We've been saying me too since the settlers arrived. You know, we really have been. I mean, we that is our history. And so we have it from the settlers, we have it from, within our community, we are violated, and we need to have honest conversations about how do we end the violence?
Yes.
How do we grow up children, boys and girls, to respect one another?
Yes. Yes. And I also,
Children, hmm
oh, I'm sorry, you had frozen for a second. Go ahead.
yes, no problem. No, 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 go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, when we talk about the children, we want to make sure that we let people know violence, rape, and the rape culture is not just happening to women, it happens to men as well now. And so
Of course.
they're reporting some of the numbers because some of the people chuckle. Well, if a man were to say, I was raped or I've been abused, I'm a victim of domestic violence. And so a lot of times the men don't want to talk about that because other men in the country, which is extremely patriarchal, feel that that's a joke if another man allows himself or some kind of way finds himself in a domestic violent situation. And
Right.
I think that's worth talking about and highlighting that,
Hmm.
how many men don't have their
Right.
cases reported because of fear of what other people are going to say, or for being, looked at as if they were not being the macho person that they were expected to be.
Right. Right. And what does that mean when, violence is violence? I mean, when you look at the rape rates, um, 1 in 5 women have been raped and 1 in 71 men have been raped. When you look at LGBTQIA plus communities, you know, 40% of lesbians have been raped, 61% of bi women have been raped, 35% of heterosexual women have been raped. When you look at gay men, 26% of gay men, 37% bi men, 29% heterosexuals have been raped. So the numbers are just, they're really high. And so What does that mean when a man has been violated and he doesn't feel comfortable talking about it because of the lack of support or understanding that he would get from other men? It's because when people think of rape, when they think of violence, they think of that as something, and you're right, it is very patriarchal. They think of it in terms of something that happens to women. You're not supposed to let somebody do that to you if you're a man.
Right.
If it's about power and it's about dominance, it can happen to anybody.
Yes.
It's not gender based.
Right.
And so we need to create spaces for men and boys to talk about what has happened to them because it is happening. I mean, and I think it's Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build strong boys than to repair broken men. I'm paraphrasing. But, we need to work on building the children up from the ground up, and give them the language to say that if someone is touching you, if someone is doing something to you, if someone is looking at you in a certain way and making you feel uncomfortable, if someone is putting their hands on you in a way that is uncomfortable, you need to have the language to tell an adult that you trust that it is happening.
Right.
We have to give children the language
Yes.
and have them have the understanding that it's their duty to speak up for themselves, that they have to be their first advocate. They have to.
Yeah.
And we as a parents have to believe them.
Right.
We all have a creepy uncle that should not be coming to the cookouts. We all have somebody
No,
that we know that he beat Aunt Mary some years ago and he's still invited to the holiday gathering. Why?
no, I do not know. And that is such an important thing you just said. I do not
Mhm.
know why in black families, you can still invite that person that has violated more than one person, but you still invite
Absolutely.
to all the family events. I just don't know
Mm.
why we do that. I don't.
Yeah.
And I think it's because people are afraid of putting that person on blast and letting everybody know this person has wronged the family. This person has lost their moral compass, if they had one at all, and we're
Right.
not going to accept it. And that's the bottom line. People have to start saying we're not going to accept it and we're not going
Right.
to deal with it. And sometimes you just got to take some of the folks out back and, let
Yeah.
them know, hey, no, this is not going to happen here and it's not going to happen anymore, because
Well, exactly.
you gotta
Exactly.
let people know it's not going to be tolerated.
Well, we have to be, and that's exactly right. We have to be intolerant to abuse. There's no, oh, he didn't mean it. He was having a bad day. We excuse it a lot. A lot of us do that. And when we do that, when we don't call out the person who is the abuser, when we don't call out the people, I was looking at something about the Catholic Church, and they were talking about how um, in one of the cases, it was probably 30 years of abuse that they documented. And what happened is that they kept moving these priests from church to church without ever holding them accountable for their crimes. And so you have generations of children who have now suffered because someone didn't do what they should have done, which is stop the abuse immediately, right? We have people who are in positions of power and we allow them to get away with the most heinous crimes. And then we create these generations of humans who are wounded.
Yes.
And we're all wounded in different ways. But, the domestic violence, the abuse, this is something that we can stop. We
Right.
absolutely can stop it. It is a paradigm shift in the mind
Yes.
about what is respect, what is consent, what does it mean to honor someone, what
Yes.
does it mean to have a healthy relationship.
Yes.
Yelling is a form of domestic violence.
Yes.
Raising your voice at someone, getting in someone's face, all of that.
Yes.
Taking someone's keys, not allowing them to have access to the finances and the family, all of that is a form of abuse, is a form of control. So if we can continue to do as you are doing and creating platforms like this and having these conversations and continuing to have these conversations in our churches and in our families. I really think we can change the way we move forward. We have to. Our lives depend on it,
And
honestly.
I love what you said, Shadra, where you just named a couple of things for some folks, because sometimes people, they're not really aware that something is violence or abuse. And so it is
Hmm.
to withhold the keys and say you can't go nowhere because of what you did or I'm mad at you.
That's right.
So to withhold the keys, withhold the car, put the keys somewhere where you can't find it, or even lock the door where you cannot leave the property, that is abuse. And to
It is.
try to say, well, I feel like you're overweight, you're getting too big, and so I'm going to make sure you're not eating anything, that is abuse. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so, we have to start naming these things and looking at it and calling it what it is. It's abuse.
Hmm.
So sometimes
Hmm.
you think, oh, they're just mean, they're just trying to help me and they're, looking out for me. Well, no, they're being abusive. That's what
Hmm.
we need to say. They're being abusive
Right.
to you. Okay. And
Right.
sometimes people are being abusive because that's all they know, because they grew up in
Right.
an abusive space.
Of
And
course.
again, that's all they know, and that's what they're
Right.
to you. And so we got a lot of healing to do in the country
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
domestic violence. But I want to say stalking is not okay. If you have
No.
broken up with someone or you have separated from them, you all
Hmm.
process of severing your ties, your relationship, then I think it's important to talk about. It's not okay for somebody to show up at your job. It's not
Not at all.
okay for them to follow you around. It's not okay for them to you go in the store and all of a sudden you turn around and they're standing there. It's not
Right.
okay for you to go to your friends and they're standing outside or parked on the street following you to see where you're going all the time. It is not okay to
Right.
show up at the church. We had a situation where one time somebody was stalking one of the members. They showed up at the church. So we had to
Mm.
call the police.
Of course.
So it is not okay to have someone to stalk you. So if someone is stalking,
No.
following you, don't think that you can handle it on your own. You need to call someone in authority
Absolutely.
that can deal.
Hmm.
Okay, and that's important, I think. Shay,
Absolutely. And
talk about
let
that.
me just say this.
Yeah,
Well, I just want to say this real quick, just to piggyback on what you're saying. One of the things that I think that needs to happen that's really important with regards to stalking, is that, stalking can be incessant phone calls. Some years ago, I dealt with a stalker. And part of the way in which she stalked me was she called constantly. Within 5 minutes, I remember one time because I saved the phone records. Within probably 3 or 4 minutes, she called me 47 times.
wow.
She would call and hang up. She would call and hang up. She would call and hang up. She would call my other phone and hang up. She would call the house phone and hang up. When those kinds of things are happening and you on the recipient end are feeling emotional distress, you are being abused, beloved. You're being abused. And when someone is being manipulative and saying to you, well, if you don't date me, I'm going to kill myself, that's a form of abuse too. It's a form of manipulation. It's
Yes.
a mind game because people who really want to take their life, sadly, they do. When someone is threatening you with ending their life because you choose not to be in their life, that is a form of abuse. And what I would say to people who are experiencing that, if anyone who's watching this or you know anybody who's dealing with someone who's stalking or really any form of abuse, write it down. Keep a log of when the person is calling. Keep a log of when the person is showing up at your job. Keep a log of all the instances where that person grabbed you or put their hands on you or yelled at you or spat in your face. Keep a log of it all. You
Yeah.
must do that. And I just want to give them, if I can, just a
Yeah.
national hotline number. The
Mm-hmm.
national hotline number for domestic violence is 1-800-799-7233. Again, it's 1-800-799-7233. And for hearing impaired, it's 800-787-3224, or you can simply dial 911. And this is why I was saying about the deaf community. The deaf community doesn't have a voice that is heard, that is respected in many environments. And so imagine being a person who is deaf, who
Yeah.
is dealing with domestic violence. You go down to a police station and no one there speaks sign language.
Yeah.
No one can communicate with you. Imagine what that must feel like. So we have to think in terms of um, access and create inclusive environments so that everyone who's experiencing these horrific events gets what they need. We need interpreters at the police station. We need to make sure that the Violence Against Women's Act, which is going through legislation, it's what they're pushing, a Violence Against Women's Act to support women who have suffered domestic. Oh, sorry. We need to make sure that those kinds of legislation are being pushed through the Senate. So contact your senators. Find out in your community what is happening with the Violence Against Women's Act. We need to make sure that criminals are being persecuted. We need to make sure that the interpreters are in the police stations, that people are getting what they need, that they are not, if someone is a trans woman coming into a police station, that she is respected for being a woman. She's respected for being who she says she is in her body, and that she's not dealing with homophobic policemen or police that are going to put her in a cell with men because they don't respect her gender identity. I mean, it's so multi-layered
That happens all the time, Shadra, where
all the time.
they do say we are only going to put you in the cell that is the cell of your birth gender. And so
Yes.
um, it's unfortunate, but that's how they handle most of the transgender persons that come in. We have Maggie who's saying, do you need any literature? I'm affiliated with the DV org. So Maggie, yes, go ahead and if you want to send that to our ELC mailbox, which is 12138 Central Avenue, number 280, and that is Bowie, Maryland 20721. Okay, and you can find that address also on our ELC website. But it's so unfortunate
Mhm.
because trans persons have fought for that, not to be the case here in America.
Mhm.
We know that that is the case. Many trans persons are misgendered intentionally, and
Absolutely.
then placed with the opposite gender which they identify with. I want
Right.
one more thing, Shadra, before we get off. When you and I
Sure.
get on here, thank you. When we get on here, we have such a great conversation. It is such a robust
Yes.
conversation. I want to talk about now those people who are domestic violence survivors, because
Hmm.
we know that some do not survive, but many do. And so those who are survivors oftentimes are re-triggered. They may have gotten
Yes.
a situation, they may have moved on, and then something happens to re-trigger them.
Hmm.
So can
Hmm.
you talk about some of the things that may re-trigger some of those who are survivors? Because we don't want to assume just because they're no longer in their situation that they have totally healed from that.
Right.
So
Right.
talk about them being re-triggered for a second.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think we, as when I say we, I mean all of us, need to think about the way in which we move in the world, right? So when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to rape, when it comes to any kind of violence perpetuated against other people, we need not assume, we need to assume that it might be the person you're talking to. I
Mm.
remember when the Cosby case happened, and there were a lot of people on the platforms. And, Cosby has been, you know, America's TV dad, right? For a lot of people. I always say he wasn't my daddy because I had a great dad. But he, for a lot of people, he represented this standard of respectability and intelligence, and he had a two house led family, and so he represented a lot. But I remember when during that time, and he was acquitted, a lot of people were really happy and were really jubilant and like, well, this is great. And, or whether it's Cosby or it's R. Kelly or whoever it is, I often say to people, you need to think about the people that you're talking to. You don't know when you are saying, yay, Cosby, he's been let out. You don't know if you're talking to someone who is a survivor.
Right.
How does that person feel? So
Yes.
I think if we could begin to think in a way to not trigger other people,
Yes.
is to think if we know that the statistics are as high as they are, 1 in 4 women,
Yeah.
then we need to assume that it might be you. So that I need to have a level of compassion and a level of grace and a level of respect. So that way, even if I'm going to have a conversation about domestic violence and certain subjects that may be triggering, maybe I saw something on the news, I ask for your consent before I talk about it. I say, you know what? I saw this thing today about R. Kelly. Are you comfortable having that conversation? We don't know where people are unless we have a relationship with that person and we really know. So I would say that we need to really start to think about the way in which we interact with people when we're posting on social media. That's another thing we need to think about. Maybe putting trigger warnings at the top of our posts when we're going to do a TikTok or we're going to do some kind of video to let people know that the material that we're going to speak about may be sensitive. They may be sensitive to it. I don't think we can be sensitive enough to people who have experienced this kind of violence.
Yeah.
As you said in the beginning, it is something that it's kind of like the analogy of the plate. You have this beautiful plate, right? And you drop it and you find all the pieces and you glue it all back together, but it has the lines
Yeah.
of where the cracks were.
Wow.
So that's what I feel about rape. That's what I feel about domestic violence. We're whole. We're
Yeah.
put back together again. We are survivors. We are strong. We are warriors. We're here. We're here for the business.
Yes.
However, we're forever changed.
Yeah.
And so if we can begin to have compassion towards our loved ones, if we can begin to look for the signs in our community, if we can begin to speak out and use our voice and be advocates for others, if we can use our privilege. My privilege is being a cis woman. I was born in this body. So that means for my trans sisters, if I want to advocate for them in situations, I'm not going to let anybody speak ill of them in my space, right?
Yeah.
Same way for someone who's deaf or who's LGBTQIA. We have to. Priest Niemoller says he was in the concentration camps, and he said, and I know you know this because we've talked about it before, but he went through the concentration camps and he said, when they came for the communists, I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. When they came for the trade unionists, I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And when they came for me, there was no one left to speak up. So we have to think of domestic violence in that way. We are each other's brother and sister, and we have to look out for each other. We have to have each other's backs, and
Yeah.
we have to end it. We can end it. We can end it. Our kids do not have to grow up with this
Yes.
if
Yeah.
we take it upon ourselves to make an active change
I
about the way we approach it.
I believe that. I believe that. And our First Lady, Dr. Williams, says words have power, and which is very true.
Absolutely.
However, I do want to just add, I heard recently about two people who had been re-triggered and
Mm,
were away from their abuser, but just so happened to have seen them at an event,
mm,
saw them, and
mm.
all of those feelings came back, all those thoughts
Yeah,
came back, all the anger came back. But oftentimes, when you see them acting like everything is fine, and people like
yeah,
talked about the family event where the family invites them and people treat them as if they haven't
Yeah,
done anything, that continues to re-trigger some people. And
absolutely.
I just know we cannot put it under the rug like we often like to do. We have to
Right.
those things. And I think it's important, like you said, to make sure people are okay. And
Yeah.
so, if you know someone who's experienced domestic violence, ask them when they go into a large area or people that's a place that's highly populated, are you okay? How are you doing in this space? And so,
Right.
we have to be willing to check in. Anybody willing to check in on somebody and just ask the question, how are you in
Yeah.
this moment?
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. No, it's important. And I think that, part of the checking in, um, it's essential that we check in on one another, um, that we assume that everyone may be a victim or a survivor of domestic violence, and then what can we do, how can we use our bodies to affect change. Not everybody's gonna be one to speak out or be on a platform like this, like you're doing. So how can you in your life, maybe that means you write a letter to your senator about the Violence Against Women's Act. I tell you one thing though that I just want to point out about triggering: smells can be triggering. I
Yeah,
remember a conversation with a friend once, a woman who had gone through some really difficult times in domestic violence in a relationship, a very violent relationship. And the smell of that person's car
wow.
took her back. And so when she got in another friend's car who had the same air freshener or the same cologne, I can't remember what the smell was, but it took her all the way back because it was the smell. So there are so many things that can trigger us. It can be seeing the person visually, it can be a smell, it can be driving past a restaurant that you were last with that person. There are many things that can trigger other people. So we need to be mindful, and
Yeah,
we need to be sensitive, and we need to be compassionate and show grace to
yes,
our beloveds because we don't know what they've experienced,
yes,
and give them room to tell their story.
yeah,
Zora Neale Hurston said, you know, um, that we must speak. We must tell our story because people will kill us and say that we enjoyed it. So we must speak about it. We must tell our story, despite how difficult it is. And not everybody's going to have the courage
right.
or feel comfortable to tell their story. And we need not push people to do that. It
Yes,
may take somebody 20 years. And if it takes her 20 years, don't ask her in the 20th year what took her so long. Tell her thank you
yeah,
for freeing herself and
yeah,
for telling her story.
yeah, yeah.
That's what we need to do.
Absolutely. And I want to say we know that the domestic violence numbers went up during the pandemic because anytime you are in an enclosed space with your abuser,
Yeah.
oftentimes
Yes.
that will cause the level of incidents to increase. And so, we're still in the pandemic. We're getting ready to go into the holiday season. Holiday season is also a time where domestic violence incidents increase.
Right.
So again, check on your friends, check on your family.
Right.
Maybe somebody need to check on you. And
Yeah.
we want to make sure that we're staying in touch with people because violence is real, domestic violence is real, domestic partnership violence is real, sexual violence is real, stalking is real, rape is real. And as Shadra told us earlier, the intentional outing of people is real. And so
Yeah.
want to just be mindful of all of those things. And this month is to raise the awareness of domestic violence.
Right.
And so that's why we're doing this on tonight. And I want to ask you on Sunday to join us. We will hear from two persons who will share their stories. One person had said she was ready and then she decided she wasn't. So that's fine.
Yeah.
We just heard about that from Shadra. So we have two people who are going to share their story about what happened with them, and we want to hear them and to be compassionate with them and to let them know we're so glad that you are a survivor and you're able to share your story with us on today. So on Sunday, that'll be at 11 o'clock where they will share
Wonderful.
testimonies on our Domestic Violence Awareness Sunday. So I don't see any questions. Let me ask if anybody has any questions for Shadra. Type it in the chat so we can ask that very quickly. We've held her over time. I think we're paying her over
Amen.
now. So
No, no, no. I just want to say, as you were saying about the First Lady talking about words have power, and I just want to, reiterate when we're talking about domestic violence survivors, we want to be really careful that we use language that is empowering and strong. And so, if we can begin to think of them as um, survivors as opposed to victims. And because I think the way in which we frame it is very different. It's very different to say that you survived something. It's very different to feel like you're a victim of something. When you survived it, you've overcome it. You are standing in a place of power. You're standing in a place of strength.
yeah,
And so if we could give that back to people who have experienced these kinds of crimes, I think that would be a wonderful first step um, in moving towards helping to empower them and end the violence,
yes, yes.
changing the way we talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we got that, I think, don't we, everybody? We are going to call them survivors. Deacon Sylvester here is saying, thanks for allowing this space to focus on domestic violence awareness. This has been great and informative. And so, yes,
Mm.
my dear cousin, thank you so much for sharing your gifts, your knowledge, your wisdom, and your experience with us here on tonight, Empowerment Liberation Cathedral. You know, we love you. I love you. And I think you're awesome. Please keep advocating because those who are survivors do need advocates like yourself to help to change some of the laws in the land. And so tell us again
Yeah.
what the people need to call their senators to try to get them to vote for again.
Yeah, so the Violence Against Women's Act, VAWA, it's the VAWA. And so basically, you need to contact your senators. You can put in VAWA in your Google, and information will come up on how you can contact your senators. And basically, they just need to pass this legislation, which will protect women against violent crimes. So it's the HR 1620. I believe that's the House of Representative Code. And it has received strong bipartisan support. So we need to not only, speak from the sidelines, we need to make sure that the people that we've elected into office are doing what they need to do to protect women and protect women's rights, which are human rights. So it's the VAWA, Reauthorization Act. That's what they need to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Maggie is Lewis is adding that Prince George's county government is having a symposium next Wednesday at 5
Wonderful.
at the new theater at Prince George's County Community College. So thank you so much, Maggie, for letting us know that. And so, if that's it, we want to say God bless you, God keep you, and may God smile upon each and every one of you who have watched on tonight, who have tuned in for this special conversation on domestic violence. Again, Chadra Pittman, bless you, and blessings
Thank you.
well and to the boys. And we hope that we can get that passed. So everybody, we'll put it up on the church's Facebook and all of that. The HR
Wonderful.
and also we'll put it up on the Instagram, and we're going to get as many people as we can to try to contact their senators to get that passed. And so we're going to look
Thank you.
because we need the protection of women. Any type of law that
Absolutely.
can do that. All right. So good night,
Absolutely.
everybody, and thank you again for joining in. I think I saw Miss
Thank you.
on. So thank you, Miss Martha, for getting on, and Katat, and who else did I see that signed on? I think that was all the ones I saw. All right, so have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night.